In the summer of 2019, if I recall correctly, I published this little book called How America Ends, which describes America's role in biblical prophecy. It is the entity that the Bible calls Mystery Babylon, and there are prophecies in Revelation, in Isaiah, in Jeremiah, in Daniel, and elsewhere that relate not to ancient Babylon, but to this entity, Mystery Babylon. And if you put all these pieces together, you begin to see that the scriptures really are talking about an end times world superpower, the United States of America. It's not my goal in this video to reiterate all that stuff, but on my channel there is another video called How America Ends that overviews this book. And this book I have made freely available here on JumpShare, and I'll have the link to this in this video's description in case you want to download this PDF. This is a print-ready PDF, which means that the dimensions and everything are already set up for publishing. So in the future, for whatever reason, if my book just disappears, this PDF can be freely shared with anyone who's interested in it, and the book could be reproduced from the PDF. But one question that I have been asked from many different people is, well, if America is going to be destroyed, where should we go if we live in the United States of America or in North America, in an area that could be affected by this impending fall of Mystery Babylon? And at the time that I wrote my book, I did not have, there is a chapter on how to prepare for what's coming. It's fairly short. It's not very detailed. And while I did point to Ecuador and other South American countries as a possible good place for people to relocate if they're considering getting out of the United States, I wasn't really adamant about that as a solution. I wasn't fully settled in my own mind. I just put it out there as a possibility that people might want to consider. But in the aftermath of publishing this book, many people have asked me, where should we go? And so it's something that I've considered. And I'm finally ready to give a solid answer on that. And interestingly enough, at the time, I didn't have all the information that was really needed in order to answer that question. But now, in the aftermath of the 2020 election steal, in the aftermath of the pandemic, and the way the world governments have responded to that, and in light of the fact that we do not live on a spinning globe in a solar system, as we are told by the establishment. You may know from my videos that I became a biblical flat earther in early 2021. So now I have a better understanding of the actual layout of the world, the Earth realm. I'm now in a much better place to answer that question. Where should we go when America falls? Or even preemptively to get out before that happens, as you see that time approaching. So obviously, if you put no stock whatsoever in biblical prophecy, you will probably think I'm a little crazy, and this video likely is not going to be for you. And likewise, if you're not a truther and you really wrestle with the idea that the Earth is a flat realm, you may struggle with some of this video as well. I'm just going to say that outright. If you're not sure about biblical prophecy, you can check this book out. Like I said, I'll make that freely available to you in the PDF format. And if you're not sure about the flat Earth stuff, but you're a Bible-believing Christian, I have a video called A Biblical Cosmology, where I talk about what the Bible actually says about the Earth. And you can look into that and see what the scriptures say and decide for yourself, well, is God telling us a different story about what the Earth is compared to what modern scientism is telling us. And I'm not going to go into depth on either of those things. Biblical prophecy, is it uh, a reliable source of truth and about the future, or the flat Earth? We're not going to cover those in detail in this video. I'm just going to mention that there's resources out there that I've put out and that others have as well if you're interested in those topics. Um, so carrying on, one thing I mention in this book is that there's a growing rift between East and West, and we're going to see a civil war in the United States, and then an Eastern coalition of powers with Russia at the head is going to launch a massive first strike, and in just one day, America is going to cease to be a world superpower. And for a time, the Russian bear will have a time of dominance on the earth. In the scriptures, there are at least 4 warnings to go out of Mystery Babylon before her destruction, because her destruction is going to be for her sins, and it is not God's intention that any Christian should die as a result of that judgment. So there are plenty of warnings in the scriptures, and one of those comes from Revelation. Let me read that. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues." Speaking of Mystery Babylon. Revelation 18:4. Look at how that language is reflected in Jeremiah 51:45. "My people, go ye out of the midst of her, and deliver ye every man his soul from the fierce anger of the Lord." Now, when it uses soul in this context, soul can either mean the immortal soul, that's not what this is talking about, or it can just mean your life, save your life, as in the SOS, save our souls. We're not literally talking about the immortal spiritual soul, we're talking about the life, save our lives. And that's what this is referring to. It's just saying, God is saying to his people, Christians, Bible-believing Christians living in Mystery Babylon, that God's anger is coming on that land. Leave, get out from under that system before the end, so that you do not suffer and lose your lives needlessly because of that wrath of God that is going to fall. Now let me talk a little bit about what it means to come out of Mystery Babylon. I'm just going to mention this briefly because I've mentioned this elsewhere. I do think that it entails 3 things potentially. One, obviously, is the physical. Just remove out of this nation before it's destroyed. It's very common sense, and this is definitely intended in these passages of Scripture that mention it. And these are 2. There are at least 4 warnings in Scripture that tell God's people, go out of Mystery Babylon. And this is one reason why we know this is referring to Mystery Babylon and not ancient Babylon. God's people, when they were slaves in ancient Babylon, did not have the freedom to, of their own free will, leave her at any time they wanted. So these 4 commands could not be directed at them, at the Hebrews in captivity in ancient Babylon. No, these are commands directed at the modern Christian. They're meant to be understood by modern Christians living in a future world superpower, Mystery Babylon, the United States of America. Kind of lost my train of thought there. Civil war, attack by an Eastern coalition of powers, destruction. 3 things, 3 ways to get out of ancient Babylon. So that first one, just simply physically remove, that's the obvious main connotation of all the scriptures on this topic. But I do think that there's also this concept of we have to remove spiritually from Mystery Babylon, and that is to disconnect and to purge ourselves of the sins that she's being judged for. Otherwise, we just carry those things with us wherever we go, and the consequences of them. And since we live in a realm of choice and consequence, as the scriptures say, God's not mocked. Whatever a man sows, he's going to reap. There's consequences for sins. If we just leave Babylon but carry all the violence and fornication and the blasphemy and the pride and the greed and materialism, idolatry with us, there's still going to be consequences for that. There's still going to be judgment or punishment for those sins, chastening, chastening for God's people who cling to those things. Um, a good picture of this is Lot and his family fleeing out of Sodom before it was destroyed by God. God gave them warning. God led them out. Lot's wife turned and looked back. She was still clinging to all the sins and comforts of that society, and she lost her life because of that. So, firstly, remove physically. Secondly, remove spiritually, and purge yourself of the sins and wickednesses of Mystery Babylon that she's being judged for. And the third is, I am I'm an American patriot, but I'm also a secessionist. I believe that the federal government has become so corrupt that we need to throw it off. And peaceful secession is the way forward. And it is my hope, I've talked about this in other videos, it's my hope that God will be merciful to us and that when Mystery Babylon falls during a civil war, that he will give us some territory, a new republic where people can still, it's not going to be like it was, folks. Uh, I don't think the United States is going to be a world superpower ever again. But it's my hope that God will give us some space to really contemplate the things that have fallen on us, and a place where God's people, Christians, and people who may not necessarily know God, but who are seeking truth and trying to live in a peaceable and moral manner, a place where they can find a refuge for a time. It's my hope that God will give us that, and I I I believe that the path to that is peaceful secession, although when that happens, the federal government's not going to just stand by. I believe that they would invade any seceding group of states, and that could very well be the trigger for this civil war that leads to the total destruction of Mystery Babylon. But it's my hope that in principle, a seceding group of states will be removing from Babylon and thus be considered in the eyes of God as a separate entity, not and spare themselves from some of that judgment. Now that's just on my part speculation. That's hope. That's something that I really hope God will give to us, but there's no guarantees on that. So I just want to say that very carefully. So that first thing, we're moving out of her. That is a clear intention of the biblical commands. We're moving out of her spiritually. That is also a clear connotation of the biblical commands. Peaceful secession. I don't know. I hope that's a path forward for us. Let me, we'll go into Jeremiah 51. Let me just see if there's anything else here. This is the passage that relates to the civil war coming in the land of Mystery Babylon. And lest your heart faint and ye fear for the rumor that shall be heard in the land, a rumor shall both come 1 year, and after that in another year shall come a rumor, and violence in the land, ruler against ruler. So it's saying, don't be afraid. Here are some signs for you that prior to the destruction, there are going to be rumors of civil war, and then eventually there will actually be open violence in the land, ruler fighting against ruler. That's civil war. That's civil war being described there. And then, therefore, behold, the days come that I will do judgment upon the graven images of Babylon. Her whole land shall be confounded, and all her slain shall fall in the midst of her. Um, And we do see in the scriptures that all the nations of the earth flow into Mystery Babylon, and once she's destroyed for a time, many of those immigrants will stay and try to rebuild what was destroyed, but it's going to be absolutely futile. And mourning, they will return to the lands from which they came. Those who survive as it says here in Jeremiah 51:49, as Babylon hath caused the slain of Israel to fall. When I wrote my book, that made no sense to me. Makes a lot more sense here in 2022, when Israel, the nation, was the most jabbed nation on the face of the earth for a while, and now we all know what that is leading to: depopulation and death. Uh, anyway, as Babylon, Western scientism, Babylon with her sorceries, and that word is pharmakeia in the scriptures, the word from which we get our modern word pharmaceuticals. As Babylon has caused the slain of Israel to fall, so at Babylon shall fall the slain of all the earth. In other words, that this mystery Babylon is a nation of immigrants. And the Bible says that she's built on many waters. That can be both literal, because America is built on many waters with the Great Lakes, numerous artery rivers, and two oceans. Three oceans bordering her, if you count Alaska, and I think the Arctic Ocean. Um, anyway, I talk about all this in my book, and I don't want to get too much off on this rabbit trail. I just wanted to briefly kind of cover these things for you as an idea of where things are going. So here we have Gleason's 1892 New Standard Map of the World. Gleason was a Bible-believing Christian and a flat earther. And this map is not just a map, it's actually a functional longitude and time calculator. And he says concerning this map that it is scientifically and practically correct as it is. And many serious flat earthers believe this is the best representation of our Earth realm that we've got. And we back that up by pointing out during World War II, and really in any military conflict, an AE projection map like this is used because the distances are correct. And if the distances are correct, and this is scientifically and practically as it is, as advertised, then this is actually the form of our Earth realm and the rough layout of it. Now, there may be some variances, but this is a pretty good working model of what the flat Earth looks like. And if you doubt that the elites know the nature of where we live, well, they use the AE map whenever they're doing any kind of military operations. For example, the air maps of World War II were AE maps. And look at the UN flags. What kind of map is on there? It's an AE, azimuthal equidistant projection, with the North Pole in the middle, and Earth spread outward from there. And just looking at this, you can see how the globe dissection was wrought. This sort of thing could be wrapped around a sphere pretty easily. I'm not going to go into detail on all that, but just to point out that I, as a biblical flat earther, do believe this is the best representation we have of the actual layout of the Earth. And a lot of work's been done by better and more scientifically minded flat earthers than I am about things like flight times and how the routes and emergency landings prove that this is actually the Earth realm where we live. So to give a little bit of context here. So here we are, United States of America, Mystery Babylon. We're in the inner circle. Think about that a little bit in terms of the flat Earth. So we have the equator here, and we have the Tropic of Cancer up here. And the great world powers have always been north of the Tropic of Cancer, in the inner circle. Rome, Europe, the United States. The reason being that this is a more temperate and warm region of the world, so it's very amenable to human habitation. And this idea of inner versus outer is actually pretty fascinating. There's There's a sci-fi series called The Expanse, which is interesting in and of itself because in some Bible versions, the firmament is described as an expanse. But in the expanse, you have the inners. These are people from the inner solar system in that sci-fi series, from Mars and from Earth. These are the major superpowers in that series, the inners. And these are the ones who are always fighting wars. These are the ones who are colonizing. These are the ones with nuclear weapons in that science fiction series, The Expanse. And actually, that's what we see in world history as well. It's the inners that are the first world powers. And then the developing world and the third world are outside or south of that tropic of Cancer. Interesting stuff. Now, the next world power is also going to be in that inner circle. The next world power that is rising is going to be a coalition of Eastern powers, and that's not really surprising given the incredible technology that we're seeing in Southeast Asia and Japan, um, and just the population of China, India, and the land resources that they've got, and just the nature of the decline in the West. And really, the things that we are doing in Ukraine is forcing Russia and China, forcing them to ally and work more closely together. And we're basically digging our own graves. We're facilitating the rise of that Eastern coalition of powers. But so if you're trying to get away from it, because in the scriptures we do see in Daniel, let me pull that up. Daniel 7, I want to say. Yeah, these are the four beasts of Daniel. If you look at the context, these are the four kingdoms before Christ returns. And I do believe that that first one, the winged lion, is Mystery Babylon. The winged lion that also sometimes had the head of a specific monarch was called a Lamassu, and it was an emblem of ancient Babylon. But this winged lion, I believe, is modern Mystery Babylon, the United States, or the West, Western civilization. And it's the first of these four beasts, and the second is a ravenous bear. Let me read the description of the ravenous bear. And behold, another beast, a second like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had three ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it, and they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. This is an Eastern coalition of powers that will one day become the Antichrist's kingdom, which is the fourth beast in this vision of Daniel's. And Russia will be the bear, will be the primary power of this coalition for a time. And the reason for that is because they're going to use nuclear weapons to take out the United States. The United States has been a superpower for 80 years. Um, yeah, less than that, 60, almost 80 years, I guess, 70, 75 years. And really, a big part of that was we had nuclear weapons and we had the will to use them. And we demonstrated that to the world. And that made us a very fearsome power to consider tangling with. And Russia is going to use their nuclear weapons, and not just to take out a couple cities, to take out an entire world superpower. That's going to really send a message to the other nations of the world. Russia is going to be the superpower for a while. And it's going to be a conquering superpower. As the scriptures say, Arise, devour much flesh. It raised up and had three ribs in the mouth of it. A lot of speculation as to what those three ribs are. I have my own ideas about it, but we can't be dogmatic. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. So here in the inner circle, Russia is going to rise and be the next superpower. So what happens if you're trying to avoid the rampant military conquest of this new Eastern coalition of powers? Where do you go? Well, I mentioned initially as a gut response, and I mentioned this in my book, that South America, specifically Ecuador, is a good option. Ecuador, Quito, has a lot of English speakers. It's near the equator, but it's high in the mountains, so it has a very consistent temperature year round, about 70 degrees, and it's a very popular place for retirees. And so if you really plan ahead and move your assets into something else besides the American dollar, which obviously will collapse and be worthless with the fall of Mystery Babylon, America. And if you move to Ecuador, you could be doing pretty well for yourself. And I'd looked into that a little bit when I was writing my book. That was my gut reaction. And now I see that South America is actually a very good option for a number of reasons. So let me ask you the question: if you're in the old world and there's a sudden shift in power, and you have a need to get out of there and get somewhere very far away, where the influences and reach of those inner circle powers can't get to you as quickly, where would you go? And we don't need to speculate too much on this because we have some examples. What happened to the Nazis? Where did they go after World War II? Um, well, interestingly enough, a lot of them, via Operation Paperclip, came to the West, came to the United States, and they became some of the most influential pioneers of American, well, Western scientism and technology. And that should be a little scary to you if you're one of these people that trusts the AMA way, the big pharma and the medical establishment and government, because these Nazis basically got a free pass on their crimes, and you know we used them. We used them to build up the system that we've got today in many ways. Um, so some of them, some of those Nazis stayed in the West. Operation Paperclip. You can look that up for yourself. Some of those Nazis probably went to, so on a flat Earth realm, Europe, and here in the inner circle. Geographically speaking, if you want to get as far away from that as possible, what are the 3 points that get you as far away as possible? Well, you got South Africa, you got South America, and you've got Australia and New Zealand over here. Now, over here, for the Nazis anyway, wasn't such a great option because you got Russia right in between, and Russians hate Nazis. Russians hate Nazis even today, and that's part of Putin's justification for his invasion in Ukraine is they want to denazify it. Ukraine has the only official Nazi military unit in the world, the Azov Battalion. Anyway, so going to this side of the world was probably not tremendously. This is also, British allied area, part of the British Empire initially. So this was not a good choice for Nazis looking to get out of Europe. South Africa was a better choice, and there's some interesting ties between Nazis and South Africa. This article gives a bit of an overview. Now, ultimately, I think the South Africans fought for the Allies, but there was an effort within the country by the Nazis to subvert that and to cause problems and prevent South Africa from, sending troops to help the Allied war effort during World War II and stuff. And with their Germanic heritage, this area of the world, combined with its geographic location, yeah, this was a fairly attractive area for um, Nazi types, and I'm sure many of them went there after World War II. But a lot of them went to Argentina, South America, and look at that. It just happens to be about as far away from the inner circle as you can get. How about that? That's really interesting, isn't it? So, in light of these things, uh, where do I think things are going to go um, in terms of what the map's going to look like and where should you go? Well, South America gets you pretty far out. I have personally considered other places. I thought about Canada. I thought about Alaska. But there's some Yeah, and I thought about Australia. But we've seen, for example, during the pandemic, that these so-called democratic nations of the West are actually some of the most totalitarian in terms of taking away freedoms and liberties, using the pandemic as justification for that. So Canada, not as free as you would think. Australia, not as free as you would think. COVID quarantine camps and people restricted to their homes, and if you're unvaccinated, unjabbed, you're a second-class citizen, etc. Uh, UK, much more totalitarian than you would have thought. But the pandemic brought all the realities out into the open for those of us who are paying attention. So, what's going to happen? What's going to happen when the United States is destroyed and Russia and this Eastern coalition of powers are given free rein to conquer? Well, we know that China wants the region around the South China Sea. It's just a fact. And without the United States to apply pressure to keep them from doing that, they will probably expand into that region. And with the West being in desperate straits, it's very likely that China is eventually going to take over these areas as well. We do see that Mystery Babylon is a superpower that exerts her dominance over all the kings of the earth. And these four superpowers before Christ comes, they're increasingly more totalitarian and increasingly they have more control over the whole earth. These are world superpowers. In the case of the United States, Western civilization has just exerted influence over the rest of the world and basically dominated through military might, economics, and other means any nation that has stood in their way. Um, Conquest is going to be more overtly the means of control that the Eastern Coalition of Powers is going to employ. We see those three ribs. A lot of people are telling me that those three ribs are three nations in Eastern Europe, but I actually think that it's much more dire than that because we do see that this Eastern Coalition of Powers will become a world superpower. I think those three ribs refer to the three so-called democratic countries apart from the United States. What are those three countries? Well, they're Australia, Canada, and the UK. And logically, this plays out. Without the US backing Japan, without the US keeping China out of the South China Sea, China is going to expand into this region and eventually overwhelm Australia, I think. I think that's very likely to happen. It won't happen right away. It will take time. And we don't know how long Russia's time of dominance over the earth will be, but she's going to devour much flesh. Now, Russia, how will her expansion play out? Well, she is going to swallow up a lot of Europe, I do believe. And once the military installations are dealt with in Canada and Alaska, Russia almost certainly will take back Alaska, which was part of Russia before the United States purchased it. Russia is the most strategic land in the world, according to some prominent military leaders. Makes much more sense on a flat Earth if you think about it, because Alaska is kind of the key. It's one of these extra inner circle territories, if that makes sense, near the Arctic Circle, a gateway between Asia and North America. And it belonged to Russia once, and it's very sparsely populated. It's going to be taken back by Russia in all likelihood. And Canada, again, very sparsely populated. They're not going to be able to put up much of a resistance against a Eastern coalition of powers, especially if China is furnishing troops to Russia. And I do believe that with their dominance and influence, they eventually will pull India into their fold as well. Now, whether that's before or after the fall of Mystery Babylon, I don't know, but India represents a ton of resources and a lot more manpower for this Eastern coalition of powers. They're going to have all the resources they need to take over what isn't contaminated of North America. So, if you know uh, anything about the Cold War, basically along this ring in here, there's all these early warning type installations because if the Russians were going to shoot missiles at us, you'd want to know as soon as possible. And so that's why these early warning systems are in northern Canada, between the United States and across the North Pole from Russia. And then we have a lot of missile silos, nuclear missile silos, in some states of the United States that you wouldn't necessarily think about. So the Dakotas and Montana actually have a lot of military installations, nuclear missile silos. These areas are probably going to be taken out by a nuclear first strike by Russia. My hope, my hope is that if we get a seceding republic, it will be down here, away from Russia, and actually the American South, which typically has had some anti federal government sympathies for a long time, going back to the American Civil War. There are some deep rifts there that never really healed. This is also what they call the Bible Belt. And three of the more independent minded states in this area are Tennessee, about in here. Yeah, you can see Nashville about in here, and Florida and Texas. And I'm hoping, it is my hope and my prayer that these three states will form the corners of a new republic, which will secede from the United States of America and, Lord willing, spare themselves from the judgment that's going to fall on the USA. And I do believe that that judgment is going to fall heavily on the populated cities of the West Coast, on Washington, D.C., on New York, and then anywhere where there's a serious New World Order presence or military outposts are also going to be hit as well. So if you're thinking of staying in the U.S., you got to consider that. I'm personally looking to move to Eastern Tennessee, and I'm not going to leave this country. In the aftermath of writing my book, I thought about this a lot. This is the land where I was born. I love the American people. I love the virtues that made America great once before we began stripping God and the Bible out of society and out of our schools. Um, and it's my hope that God will be merciful to us and give us just a little bit of territory where we can live in peace and still worship freely for a while before eventually totalitarianism comes for all of us. But understand Denver is basically the New World Order headquarters in North America. There's the international airport there. Um, Interestingly built in the shape of a swastika with a city under the airport. The airport itself is the size of a city, built outside of Denver, something like 40 miles out from Denver itself. And yeah, it's just a really interesting. The airport and the area is, it's interesting if you look into it. It is the New World Order headquarters of North America. So you don't want to be near Denver. You don't want to be where I currently am, which is near Washington, D.C. You don't want to be in New York. You don't want to be in any of these California cities. You don't want to be in Vegas. My thought on this is that God's going to judge America for her sins. Mystery Babylon is being judged for her sins. So those cities which are most wicked are likely going to be judged in some form or another. And are, whether they're struck directly by nuclear weapons or whether they just collapse into absolute anarchy as the power goes out, as the government falls, as the Civil War goes on, and as people turn on each other and begin pillaging. I don't know, but you don't want to be in one of those cities when things go sideways. Uh, anyway, so we've got Russia Russia's going to swallow this up and probably take large territories here in Canada. And honestly, if you're in some of these more remote areas of Canada, it could be a while before you feel that power shift at all. But I do think the Russians eventually are going to expand into these areas. As the Earth system warms, these areas will be more accessible, and resources will begin to be taken out of these areas. So, you may want to stay put for a while, and you might have a few generations of relative independence after the New World Order and the West falls. But uh, eventually, we're heading towards that beast kingdom of the Antichrist, which will rule over the entire Earth, and which will make war against the saints. And we don't know how much of the United States will be irradiated and unlivable, but the Bible is clear that portions of it will basically be a wilderness inhabited only by wild beasts, and that parts of it will be on fire, probably until the end of history. That sounds pretty crazy, but there are underground mine fires that have been raging in Pennsylvania for over 50 years. We just don't know what the effects of a massive all-out nuclear onslaught will be. And what's going to happen is the Civil War is going to take down America's defenses to the point that she's extremely vulnerable to Russia's new hypersonic missile technology, which right now they are mass producing. And there's no counter for it. The Russians have the best offensive and defensive missile systems in the world. The Bible says that the arrows launched against Mystery Babylon they won't miss. They won't miss. They're going to hit their targets. Uh, so I do think that those three ribs are Australia, Canada, and the UK. Because if you think about it, if Russia has taken Canada and whatever's salvageable from the United States, Alaska, for instance, they own this entire ring now. They're going to want a gateway up here, and the gateway to that and to the Atlantic European coastline is the British Isles. And so it just makes sense that they would eventually take over this as well as a means of securing the entire North Atlantic for themselves. So, in light of all this, a very logical place to relocate is still South America, as I laid out in my book. And I can say that now with much more confidence, understanding the layout of the Earth realm and just how some of these things are likely to play out given the proximities and the history of all these nations and so forth. So I would say if you are in a place right now where you're considering getting out of the United States, or you know that that's going to be necessary at some point, and so you're starting to make plans and look ahead, where should you go? South America is a good option. And now, as I said, eventually totalitarianism is coming for all of us. That's just the way it's going to be. The Antichrist's beast system is going to control the entire world, and anyone who rejects it because of faith in Jesus Christ, they're going to be hunted down and they're going to be executed. Now, if you're in some of these areas of the world that are more wilderness, that have rugged terrain and mountains, and you know your area better than the establishment does, I do believe that there are going to be Christians who survive and successfully evade the New World Order, um, right up until the time that Jesus comes back. I think that's going to happen. And hopefully this video will help some people start thinking ahead, start preparing themselves and their families, and teaching their children what's coming next and getting them ready so that they are prepared and equipped for that time when they are being actively hunted by the Antichrist's one world system, that terrible horned beast kingdom of the Antichrist. And South America is a great option. It's just, and it shows you really why South America has been so isolated from the rest of history. It's not one of these inner circle powers. It's far out there. And culturally, it's pretty different from the West. I do think it's just a matter of time before the totalitarian powers will creep down there. But considering that the United States, much of it will be irradiated and unusable, it might sort of dissuade for a time the Russian bear from moving down into these regions. There's some logistical concerns there that would need to be dealt with. And so I think that this is a good, solid choice, South America. How much time and space that will grant, I don't know. And obviously, South America has its own deep seated problems, both spiritual problems and physical problems, problems with crime, problems with cartels, problems with corrupt and totalitarian governments of their own. But still a better option than anywhere else in the world as far as I see it. Well, thank you for watching, and I hope that this has been an interesting and informative video. I didn't actually show this, but I'll just mention it briefly in passing to finish this video up. The layout of Gleason's map is very similar to Urbano Monti's 1587 map. This is a flat Earth map, by the way. That's very clear if you look at the insets on Urbano Monti's map. You make it clear that the Earth system is in the middle and the sun, moon, and wandering stars move around it. The Earth is fixed and does not move according to the scriptures. And just look at how modern, really, the layout of the main continents are in this map. Now, obviously, there's some weirdness here, but this may actually be a fairly accurate representation because this Antarctic ice wall, ice plateau, ice sheet, whatever you want to call it, it does cover up land. We know that, and we don't know what that land looks like today, really. We know that some of that land's down here, south of New Zealand. We know that some of that land's down here in tourist Antarctica, south of South America. But I just wanted to point out that if you're not sure that we live on a flat earth realm like the Bible says, that this perception of things goes back a long ways, and the globe deception is actually relatively new. Urbano Monti's map of the Earth. Uh, I actually intended to mention that a little earlier when I was talking about the air maps of World War II and the map on the UN flag and all that stuff, but I forgot. But anyway, I hope that you have found this video useful. I hope that it will benefit you and your family. And God bless, and keep staying vigilant as we see things develop in this world around us. Thanks for watching.